and welcome to my channel. I'm excited about this video, you guys, because this video represents the end of what I am calling my recent kind of theme that has been running through all of my content, which is how we can be more responsible creators and consumers online, how we can be more empathetic, how we can be more aware. And specifically, you might notice that I've been using several examples of people that I feel might be displaying some irresponsible online communication in order to kind of work that theme into various videos. So I talked about what I saw happening maybe with like reality TV. I talked about what I saw happening with Danae Jackson. I talked about what I saw happening with Gabrielle Union. I talked about what I saw happening with Keke Palmer in regards to how her boyfriend, or now ex-boyfriends, we don't know, but it would seem as if they're not together anymore, how his decisions impacted her life online. And if you don't think that his decisions impacted her life online as well as his, I challenge you to go and look in the comment section of anything that she's posted in the last 2 days or so. There's consistent mentions of him, even though she's not talking about him at all. I think what happened this past weekend was probably the biggest example of it and combines every single thing that I have been talking about or been wanting to focus on. And so for that reason, after this video, I am giving this topic a rest. If you don't know what happened last weekend, I will go ahead and fill you in now. Jonah Hill, the star of many millennial era frat boy comedies such as Knocked Up, Superbad, This Is the End, the list goes on. He was in a relationship with a young woman named Sarah Brady. Sarah Brady is a professional surfer and a model. They have about a 10 to 15 year age difference between them. Sarah was in her early 20s when they started dating, and Jonah was a much older man who initially reached out to her because of the surf and bikini pictures she posted on Instagram. When they got into a relationship, though, Jonah made it clear to her, apparently in verbally and also in text message form, that he was uncomfortable with her posting these photos. And according to Sarah, she was initially on board with trying to please him and trying to have her life and her job as a surfer and a model fit into what he needed to feel secure in their relationship. But eventually, the two realized it wasn't going to work, and they broke apart. Shortly after they broke apart, Jonah met someone else, and he is now engaged to that person, and they have a child together. So this all occurred within like 2021 to 2022. These two have not been together since 2022. And so imagine everyone's kind of collective shock and surprise whenever Sarah decided this past weekend that enough time had passed, and she wanted to come forward with her version of events, which she was able to corroborate with text from Jonah, which was basically that he had been a controlling, misogynistic, evil freak of a partner who weaponized therapy language against her in order to regain control or to gain control over her in her actions and her presentation as a person. This was all shown on social media via Sarah's Instagram account, where she posted text from Jonah, in her stories throughout the weekend. And she did it, she said, because she was tired of people asking her, what happened with you guys? And she wanted a chance to work through her anger and disappointment and rage about the relationship in a way that she felt was safe. Somebody questioned her in one of her texts and they said, hey, well, what are you going to do if he sees this? She said, I'm afraid of him. And so going public on social media with this information was the only way that she felt she could be honest about her experience in the relationship. And she could also provide, hopefully, another example for people who might not understand when they're dealing with a certain type of person, that this is not what healthy communication looks like. And if at all possible, you need to get away from this type of person as soon as you can. So I'm looking at this and I'm taking it in. I do think that it was ironic that she came forward with this story so close to what was going on with Keke Palmer. And by ironic, I just mean you have a situation where somebody is going through something and a terrible man is at the helm of it. And so it's like, okay, well, I want to talk about my thing that happened because of a terrible man. And so I'm looking at this and I start to see two very different social media responses emerge. The first, all hail Queen Sarah. She is right for coming forward, for blasting this person, for having this inappropriate dialogue towards her, for treating her in this way. She's right for coming forward with this story because so many women and, people need to see that this is not correct behavior. And hey, if Jonah Hill is a public figure and people support him and this is how he acts in his personal relationships, then we need to all know this because we don't need to support him anymore. And then there was the other side of the social media response, which was, what exactly did Jonah do wrong? And one of the text messages that Sarah posted, she posted a list that Jonah gave her of the things that she needed to do, his boundaries, that's what he called this list, things that she needed to do in order for him to feel secure in the relationship. He told her, hey, this is how I need you to operate. If you can't do this, I'm not the right person for you. And a lot of people were like, well, good job. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being that emotionally aware to say that kind of thing instead of just mistreating her without any rhyme or reason. People like the way that he basically said, hey, I understand you need to do you for your job, but your job, your social life makes me uncomfortable. So if you want to be with me, you have to cut all of that out. They applauded him for being so upfront, so clear-cut, so well-spoken. And that was women and men. I noticed that a lot of people were noting the fact that men were siding with Jonah in a lot of the ways and saying, hey, don't you guys tell us you want us to communicate? So a man communicates and now you're pissed? We don't get it. But it was both women and men who were saying, no, he did the right thing. He told her what he needed from her to be in a relationship with him. And then there was another side of it. And I'm not sure this was the side that a lot of people knew existed because it wasn't being picked up by all the news outlets and it wasn't being posted on TMZ and all the blogs. But this was the side that was presented by a Instagram account that goes by the name House and Habit, and it's run by this young lady right here. And this is apparently a person who knew both Jonah and his ex-girlfriend, Sarah. And she was basically saying that Sarah was only presenting one side of their story. She only presented one side of the text threads. She has been trying to blast Jonah ever since they broke up. And to her, because she actually witnessed the relationship unfold and then implode in real time, it would seem as if Sarah is not only saying these things out loud so she can get this off her chest and start her healing journey and, all the other things we say when we decide to share our deep, dark situations on social media. But to her, it seemed that Sarah was sharing these things because she was really, really still hurt that Jonah moved on so quickly, that he found someone that was seemingly right for him, and that he started a family the way that he was that's what he wanted to do the entire time, and Sarah wasn't ready. Let's talk first, though, about how most people responded to Jonah. And by most people, I mean the voices that were the loudest and most respected, which tended to be the voices of women. Most people agreed that Jonah's use of the word boundaries was incorrect. Now, this came as a surprise to me, I want to be honest, because I think until the situation happened, there had not been so much discourse around the proper use of boundaries. I don't know how many times people have been like, hey, that's right, queen, set those boundaries. When a woman is like, a man can't call me after 10. He needs to know this, he needs to know that. Those are my boundaries. We have consistently accepted as a group of people for a long time that a boundary is something that you set. And when you set it in relationship with somebody else, they have to follow it or they have to go. After this weekend, though, it was announced to me, and I'm sure to a lot of others, maybe for the first time, that actually that's not what a boundary is. A boundary is something you set for you. What people suggested then is that as a person, you need to know yourself well enough. You need to know your own boundaries, what you will and will not accept before you enter into anything with anyone else, so that you don't spend time telling this person, well, hey, this is what you have to do to be with me. This is how this is how that is, because that's controlling them. So if you, for example, were a professional actor who was looking for a young, hot girlfriend, and you saw a young woman who was modeling and surfing and being in bikinis as part of her job, and you know yourself and you know the fact that you have certain hard no's when it comes to behaviors, when it comes to how people present themselves, et cetera, then you don't need to date someone like this. You need to keep in mind your boundaries for how people need to treat you and how people need to present themselves to the public when they are with you, and not engage with anybody like that to begin with. The reason why people were so hung up on Jonah's use of the word boundaries, though, is because Jonah has a history with seeking help for his mental health. In fact, he did a mental health film on Netflix not that long ago. Apparently, when he was in the relationship with Sarah, he made her see a couples therapist with him named Dr. Stern. And so to a lot of people, it seemed that he had gone through this therapeutic process and he was weaponizing the process and weaponizing the vocabulary he learned from the process against this woman in order to manipulate and control her. While this may be true, and here's my different perspective coming in here, while this may be true, I want to point out the fact that when someone is going to therapy, when they're seeking help, it's normally because they have identified that they are an imperfect person and they are trying to have a certain type of experience. They're trying to navigate through life anyway. And so a lot of times if you're dealing with somebody who is in therapy and they're trying to figure out how to navigate a relationship with you, they're not necessarily weaponizing the language they're learning against you. They're just using the language. And how do we decide the difference? I think that that's subjective. If we support the person's use of the language because we support the person, we tend to just say, hey, you're using your tools, you're doing a good job, it's great. If we do not support the person and therefore we do not support them using the language, we then call it weaponizing. That's just something that I observed from the situation.
I didn't just observe it from this situation. I actually have been looking at this for quite some time. If you've been here on my channel for a while, then you know that I have an issue with armchair psychiatric experts, which are people that sit at home behind a computer. You present something to to them. Maybe it's a opinion that you have. It's a personal experience that you had, and they respond to you with their opinion of who you are. They give you an entire psychiatric diagnosis. It's one of the reasons why I stopped wanting to share certain types of personal information, certain personal experiences from my past, and certain types of opinions, because I knew that one of the internet's most favorite pastimes these days is over pathologizing each other and ourselves. People have gotten into a little bit of mental health know-how, especially post-pandemic, and they are using that consistently to place each other into groups. And those groups are mental health related groups. So, hey, I have ADHD and I have autism and I have this and I have that, placing each other's behavior under a microscope. Well, I saw this person do this and I saw this person do that, and they said this in a story. So they must have a multiple personality or a borderline personality disorder. And I know because I can prove it based on, it's something that happens consistently on social media. It's not just something that's happened to me, but I see it happen a lot. In fact, I brought it up when I talked about the reception people got, the reception the cast of Love is Blind got. I talked about how many times people were screaming at them, you have this disorder, you have this, you have this. And I looked into it. I read a couple of articles after this whole Jonah Hill thing came out, because I just thought it was very hypocritical that people were saying, we're so mad because we see millennial men doing this all the time. They will take therapy, and then they will weaponize the tools of therapy against women to control them, so that it seems like they're nice guys, but they're actually being terrible using this information in very unhealthy ways. And it's just interesting to me that people claim that only millennial men do this, when this is a common thing on social media, period. I'm going to link a couple different articles that talk about this, but the over pathologizing of other people is also weaponizing therapy language, and people do it on social media all the time. Anytime somebody describes somebody as a person that they did not like, is automatically a narcissist without that person having actually received a diagnosis from a psychiatrist. That's weaponizing therapy language. Anytime somebody says, oh, you know what, I think that we're all a little bit delulu, even though that's fun, that's weaponizing therapy language. It's using it in the wrong way. Somebody might not like being called delusional. Delusional is actually a psychiatric disorder. I'm just pointing that out to say that there are moments on social media specifically where we support people using certain language, especially therapy language, because it makes us feel more comfortable to put them in a box, but it isn't right. And so Jonah is not the only person to do this, to use those tools and that language incorrectly. And really the only person who should be talking to you in therapy terms and using certain tools with you is your therapist. But we do it all the time on social media. We overstep that boundary all the time. And so that's what I mean by, if we approve of the person, we let them say these things. If you think somebody is an authority and they call someone else a narcissist, we're like, yes. And by authority, I just mean a personality on social media that you like. We approve. We're like, yes, this is great. But if you don't like them and they start using words, who are they to call? None of us should be using these words unless we are licensed therapists dealing with a person that we are actively treating. So I just wanted to point out that hypocrisy, and that's the reason why I made the comment that I just made.
Going back to my point of people saying, oh, well, he's a public figure. We don't want to support him anymore if he acted like this in a relationship. I think that that's fair. But do we have evidence that he's acted like that every single time? Well, even one time, that's too many times. Okay, that's fair. But that brings me to an issue that I've seen online where people will encourage people to be their authentic selves, encourage people to show up as broken individuals, encourage people to be honest about what they're struggling with, about when they've made mistakes and when they haven't been successful in certain things, but at the same time swoop in with very aggressive and crushing criticism of that individual. A lot of people tend to treat poor behavior as if it is something that is consistent and never stopping versus something that can happen within a closed context. So what I'm saying is I totally understand if by her releasing this information, people say to themselves, oh, I'm not supporting Jonah Hill. But what if somebody judged you based on how you acted in a situation with someone who was terrible for you, who triggered all your little insecurities? I don't care why y'all got together, but once y'all got together, y'all were fighting. It was very clear that this is not the relationship for me. What if someone judged you based on how you acted just there? Unless someone has broken laws, I don't think their personal lives should be used as a public pawn.
So I want to make something clear because I don't think I've made it clear in this video up to this point. But I do understand that one of the reasons why people are responding so strongly to this issue is because there used to be basically a code for abusers, which was whatever happens behind closed doors is nobody else's business. And so, for example, if a woman came out of the house and she had a black eye, everybody in the community might know that she was being abused by her partner. But you know what? That's their business. It's what goes on in their house. We'll just say she walked into a wall. If someone is heard screaming in an apartment down the block, you know what? It's their business. Whatever happens behind closed doors is their business. And it's not her right. It's not our right to get involved. That's not what I'm saying here. I do think when abuse is happening, people should get involved. In fact, when I was 25, I was involved in a mentally and emotionally abusive relationship. And it's probably the reason that to this day, I've always had an issue with choosing or wanting to be in situations that I know would be deeply emotionally committed, because I'm always afraid of someone turning on me and displaying the kind of behavior that this man did when the doors were closed. And he treated me like this for about 5 months, off and on, screaming at me for every little thing I would do, calling me names, making fun of my body, making fun of my sexual performance, making fun of my lack of worldly experience compared to his, not making me pay, but he had no money. It was a nightmare of an experience. And I went through it for about 5 or 6 months. And I went through it because I thought that if you finally get your chance at a relationship, that's something that you should do. And if it wasn't for the intervention of a friend who happened to be at my house the night of my birthday, and this man was cussing me out from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, and I put him on speakerphone, and she heard the way he was talking to me, and she started to cry. And this particular person was someone that I had witnessed be yelled at by boyfriends. I had witnessed her yell back at them. I had asked her, well, why don't you just leave? Why don't you put yourself through this? And she told me, because it's a relationship, you don't just give up on a relationship. And I remembered that. But then after she'd had those experiences, she'd gone on to experience love and have a really just loving relationship where she didn't have to fight for her life to exist. She didn't have to, constantly apologize and deal with insults and bad behavior from someone. So she knew what I was experiencing, and she also knew that there was better. And so when she heard how that man was talking to me, she started crying and she turned away. And I knew based on her reaction that, okay, I'm not in something good here. If it's just based on what I naturally want to do, he would have been gone months ago. But I felt like I had something to prove. As a young woman in my first relationship, I can't just walk away just because he's difficult to deal with. And so once there were other eyes on the situation, I realized what it was and I walked away from it. However, this man had also been with other people in relationships. This man had also been friends with other people. In fact, we were sitting in a restaurant one day and somebody ran up to us and was like, "Hey, Mike," we'll call him Mike. "Hey, Mike." And he was so kind to that person and so warm to them. And I said, "You seem to be so nice to other people, but you're horrible to me. Why is that?" And he just rolled his eyes and he goes, "What you think is what it is." And I didn't get it at that time, but what I realized later on was he treats me like this, and it's a reflection of how he views me. I don't think that he's like this with every person that he knows. I also think that he might not always be like this because right now in the time of his life, when we're dating, he's dealing with substance issues. He's dealing with finance issues. He's dealing with self-esteem issues. He's dealing with family issues. And I could see he's dealing with past relationship issues. And I can see how him dealing with all of those things is impacting not just how he views me, but also how he views a lot of this behavior is not necessarily normal for him, but it's definitely something that's coming out of his situation. And it doesn't make it right, but it also doesn't mean that he's going to be like this always. So basically, what I did was I said, "You're not for me." I sent him a really terrible goodbye text. And I say terrible because all he could say whenever I sent it, he called me back and he just goes, "Wow." Because I was like, you know what? I basically told him to go to hell. But I also will never get on the internet and say, "Hey, this was the guy's name. This was the name of my abuser. Ladies, watch out." Because I don't want to be the person that stops him from being able to experience something better just because he made a mistake in his relationship with me, just because he was terrible with me. Now, if he does have a pattern that reveals itself over time, it will reveal itself over time. And I do want to see with this Jonah Hill situation, if we hear from other women that he used to date, that, yeah, he was like this with me. He was like this with me. He was like this with me. But until then, I do want to just point out that we are seeing evidence of a situation where two people were really wrong for each other. And no, he did not go about expressing his disappointment and discontent in the situation the right way. And yes, the ways that he did express it can be called manipulative and controlling and coercive, but the relationship ended because it was not good for them. And he did move on. And so we don't know what his behavior is like. We don't know enough about his character to categorize him as an abuser in this final way. And that's a big label to give someone. It really is. And I know that there's been situations that I've been in, situations that friends of mine have been in, where you're with the wrong person and y'all fight like cats and dogs and you send terrible text messages to each other, terrible messages. You say terrible things to each other. And then you sit back years later and you're like, "Oh, so-and-so got married. I see. Oh, so-and-so is with, I see. Okay." I do think we just have to remember that all bad behavior does not always look the same. And because we don't have all of the information about this situation, it's very dangerous for us to band together and say, yes, she was right, out and down with all abusers. And I say this as somebody who has been in an abusive situation before. A lot of people were just very, very supportive of the young woman. I'm supportive of whatever somebody thinks they need to do in order to achieve healing in their situation. However, after being online for a little bit and after witnessing things that I've witnessed, I'm also aware enough to know that you sharing your story, you sharing those personal details, you airing someone out, that's not ever really the end of it, because people are going to take it and they're going to process it and they're going to come up with additional things. And in this situation, especially according to the other texts that we have and that we're seeing, we may not even have the whole story, but social media doesn't care about that. What we care about is what's been presented to us, and we're very, very quick to throw someone entirely away. I said before, and I'll say it again, you need to be as careful with your trash as you are with your treasure. Certain things do not belong in the court of public opinion as presented on social media, because what you'll find
is you're not only now dealing with the trauma of what you went through, but now you're also dealing with the trauma of how it was received by a bunch of strangers online who really don't have any stake in the situation. I think it's important to weigh in when you have a different perspective, because a lot of times social media can just feel like a big echo chamber, and you'll find yourself thinking about a situation or looking at it through different lenses. And it's like, am I crazy? I'm not justifying what Jonah did or what anybody does who's in a relationship and talks to people that way. I am, however, always going to question people taking the route of airing whatever happened to them out online, because it always causes more harm, it would seem. All of this happened, like I mentioned earlier, in the wake of the fallout with Keke and her Darius and Darius. And I was scrolling through social media, and most people were saying the same things about the situation. You know, it's very sad, and he was mooching off her anyway, and he should have told her in private, which, by the way, I found that hypocritical, because a lot of people were saying, oh, I wish that, you know, Darius had told Keke these things in private instead of calling her out on social media like this. And then they were supporting this young woman airing Jonah out in public instead of going to him in private and saying, hey, our relationship a year ago, even just writing him an email. Hey, this happened a year ago and it didn't make me feel good, and I don't feel good about this, and these things were wrong, and I would like an apology from you. And like I said earlier, somebody asked her, well, what happens if he sees this? And she said, I don't know. I'm afraid of him. I don't know if I said that earlier, but that's one of the texts she's posted. And so in a way, airing out what she did was kind of avoidant. I don't want to have the conversation with the person. Now, I'm not invalidating her fear. It might have been very, very real. Anyway, moving on. I thought it was interesting that a lot of people were so angry with Darius because he did call her out publicly, which was totally understandable. And I noticed a lot of people were pointing out things like, well, you know how they got together. She made the first move on him. Ladies, you shouldn't do this. I know that I had a lot of theories and things that I wanted to discuss, but there was one person who entered the chat who had a point of view about the situation, and I hadn't thought about this at all. And her name was Shan Boodram, okay? Now, I've talked about Shan before because last year she had this whole concept that was taking over social media called vabbing. And I was like, oh, no, I would never do that. And I'm not surprised that she would think that works, because that's kind of her line of work and that's who she is. And that's not who I am. I know, you know, whatever, right? But if you don't know who she is a self-proclaimed sexpert. She has appeared in documentaries. She's had a YouTube channel for about 10 years where she talks about sex and relationships and how people interact and what works and what doesn't. And Shannon's life took on a different tone a couple years ago in her content when she became a mom. And because of this transition, she had a different take on what happened with Darius and Keke. And here's what she said.
The Keke Palmer and Darius Jackson internal turned external by the way of his public tweet drama that continues to evolve and also touches upon so many hot button intimate topics is something that I feel compelled to throw my 2 cents into while acknowledging the fact that's what I'm doing. These are pennies. I don't have any more information than the average person does on this. So all I can offer is some maybes. And maybe number one, maybe Keke Palmer is having an unprecedented historical moment, and that is surprising for her and very conflicting for her partner. And by that I mean, traditionally what happens when a woman has a kid is that initially there is an extreme plummet in her desirability and her sex appeal. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I've seen a celebrity in recent memory whose sex appeal has skyrocketed so fast after having a baby in the way that Keke Palmer's has. To me, since the Met Gala, she's just been on it, just dripping, oozing, giving. And I can imagine that has been incredibly inspiring for other mothers and non-mothers to watch, because often we are led to believe that mothering means the death of othering. The other parts of yourself, other people desiring you, an identity that isn't completely conjoined with your kid. And so to see a woman be fully present and fully in love and fully in joy of mothering, while also being fully connected to herself as an individual and to her right to still be desirable, has been incredible. And I would imagine that you would feel very inspired to lean into that. Now, I'd also imagine that maybe as the partner of someone like that, this would go completely against what you thought was going to happen after the baby, because traditionally there's a period of hunkering down where you have less social interactions, you have less attention from other people, and there's like a burrowing that happens with the family, which can cause a whole other host of issues too, when you don't, still try to maintain a balance of your old life with your new. But if that's what you thought was going to happen, and then instead now you're confronted with the fact that your partner is getting more attention and has more marketability than ever before, I can imagine that there might be some challenges with that. With extreme emotions associated with parenting is really easy to talk about online, impartially, but really hard to talk about when it is close to your heart, when it literally is your heart. And maybe this is just two people really trying their best to take on the biggest role of their life. There's a lot of pressure that's associated with that. And pressure makes you do some really stupid things, especially on one party in particular in this case. And maybe if this is really what the main issue in your dynamic is, it's an opportunity to say what you didn't know how to verbalize before. And maybe a lot of the triggering comments that you saw online that made you feel away are actually opportunities for you to put language to feelings that you didn't really quite know how to explain before. And instead of a stupid tweet, you can now go with a heartfelt conversation with your hat in your hands and apologize and say, I need to do a do-over, a huge do-over, because but this is how I'm really feeling. This is what I'm really going through. And right now, more than anything else, I need a partner, because I'm terribly afraid that I'm not a good parent. I'm terribly afraid of not being a good provider, and I want to do better.
I never would have put that kind of thought into that situation, because I have no idea what it's like to be a new parent adjusting to that role. I have no idea what it's like to be in a hypogamous relationship where I make more money than my partner, and the clash that can happen there when I start putting myself out in the world in new ways. I have no idea what it's like to navigate that space. So I don't have the same perspective as she was able to bring to the situation. And I noticed with Shannon's perspective, it wasn't so much as an F you, Darius, but rather a you messed up because you're struggling. And here's a little bit of insight as to why that might be. I hope you get through this. And so just to take it back to my perspective on this situation, like I said, I don't deny that what Jonah did was incorrect. I think that social media can be a great place to express yourself, to tell your story, etc., etc. But I also think we have to be very, very careful. When you bring your private issues to a bunch of strangers, you never know how they're going to take it. You never know how they're going to receive it. You never know when the tide could turn on you. Well, people are on your side today. Well, what happens tomorrow? And you end up having to deal with the memory of what you went through, and now the memory of turning this very, very private, painful thing into now a public, painful thing. And it's a hard thing to deal with. And I speak from experience, so I'll always have a different perspective. I will add this. I felt like it was interesting that no one was putting any blame on her as far as her participation in the situation. I remember a couple months ago with Danae Jackson when she said, I knew Derek was behaving badly. I knew that, I was a willing participant in this, and I kept going. And so what's interesting to me is not a single person. And I don't know, I didn't spend that much time in comment sections and this and that. I was kind of just like, oh God, because everything was sort of sounding the same. But I looked at what this person was expressing, and it seemed to me like, hey, okay, he's being a jerk kind of early on, you can go. And it looked like she was angry with him because he was as terrible as he presented to her, and she stayed. And I wondered, where were the people calling for her accountability for the fact that she stayed in a situation that was hurting her and is now upset because she's hurt? And then I said, well, she's not a Black woman, and people tend to be harder on us when we've suffered. Pick better men. Where is your accountability? Shut up and figure it out. And so that is something that I thought about. With that, friends, comes the end of this particular series of videos in my life. I know people are going to continue to do this kind of thing. My opinion on it is not going to stop anyone. However, I do want to close this video out with a short little story. So this past weekend, I was walking my dog, and I happen to live in an area that is surrounded by a lot of vegetation, trees and wilderness, it would seem. And I'm walking my dog, and I'm in my own world. And I hear someone say to me, "Stop." And I look up, and there's a woman holding her hand up like this. And I was offended because this woman doesn't know, but she and I have some silent beef. And she made a comment once about her parking spot that she pays for. And I feel like she's a little rude. She didn't have to say all that. I'm going to move. But anyway, she has her hand up and she told me to stop. And I'm like, "Excuse you?" And she keeps her hand up and then she points down. And I look down and there is a huge rat snake on the ground by the very stairs I was about to take back up to my apartment. And I said, what? Because what's crazy is I hadn't been outside that long. That means that snake was there when I came down the stairs. And I came down and went one way on the stairwell, and I came back coming the other way. So there's a way that I could have missed it, but coming back through, there was no way I would have missed that. If she hadn't been there, I would have absolutely stepped on that snake, or worse, my dog would have stepped on it and probably tried to play with it. And then maybe the snake unhinges his jaws and swallows him. I don't know. But when I first saw her, I was so offended. I was like, who is she to tell me to stop? I can do what I want. I'm walking around. Whole time, she's trying to point me towards danger in my path that I didn't even know was there. That's how I want you guys to treat these last few videos that I have been making talking about this topic. I don't so much as make them for people who would never share their personal things online. I never talk about, I would never. I make them for people who witness things like this young woman did this past weekend. And they say, you know what? When I go through something with my ex, I'm going to do the same thing. When you're creating, you have to think about the reverberations of those creations. And if you don't, you'll be just like me, about to wander right into the trap of a rat snake. And instead of it being a literal rat snake, it's a Reddit page you didn't know about. It's a comment section that's about to rip you apart. It's your sense of privacy. And it's the destruction of your healing process that you're about to step into and you don't even know it. So please consider these last series of videos as me being the one who tells you to stop and look. And with that, class is dismissed. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Please feel free to tell me how you feel about the situation in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.